Welcome to Locked On Heat. On today's show, we'll be joined by Nekias Duncan to discuss our early impressions of Victor Oladipo and the toughest playoff matchups for the Miami Heat. No one wants to see the Nets in the first round, but is there even more dangerous matchup looming later in the playoffs? We'll tell you who and much more coming up next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Thursday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app, thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. We're joined today by a very special guest. He's a contributor over at basketballnews.com and the co-host of the Dunker Spot podcast. Friend of this podcast, and also Zach Lowe alike, it's Mr. Nekias Duncan. How are you, Nekias?
I'm doing much better after the intro. How are y'all?
I'm doing great. I mean,
You know what I just realized is the Dunker Spot named after, is that a Duncan thing?
I could work that way. I was just going with, okay, let's go with a super granular thing on the basketball court. But
Okay, so it has nothing to do with your last name. It's more of a coincidence.
Yeah, we'll take it. I'll take credit for it.
Right.
That was what I was going for.
I just sort of realized that, so I figured I'd ask the question.
No, if you wanted to go more obvious, you make it the Duncan Spot, but that's, maybe spelled Duncan with an apostrophe K-I-N. I don't know. It's just, we're brainstorming here. He's not going to change the brand now, Wes. I don't know why you're messing everything up already. No. Like, we just started this show.
all of the basketball things are taken for names of podcasts at this point. There's nothing left. There's nothing left. I want to I want to start a basketball podcast and name it completely just just something that like the over and back violation, and people will be like, I don't even know what that means. Like, just something completely obscure.
Called the take foul.
The take foul. There you go. That's actually not bad. That's actually
with your host Markieff Morris. Yeah, with your host Markieff Morris. Anyway,
flagrant 2.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to be talking about some basketball related things on today's show. We'll be talking about some potential playoff options that the Miami Heat might face, along with some tough decisions that Erik Spoelstra will have to make regarding his rotation of players. But we'll start off with, I think, the biggest buzzing news over the Heat over the last couple of days, and that's the return of Victor Oladipo, his comeback now, 4 games having been played with the Miami Heat this season, and looking to be a regular contributor as part of Spo's rotation moving forward. So, Nekias, now that you're on the show, just wanted to get your take on what you've seen from Victor so far, because we've been discussing Victor's impact of late, and it hasn't been as great as people would have expected. Some people are already saying, well, give him some time, it'll be fine. Others arguing perhaps that maybe he's not going to ever return to form. Where on you on what you've seen from Victor Oladipo this season?
I will start with a question. Like, what exactly are the expectations for Victor Oladipo? I think that starts there.
15 minutes a night, no more, no less.
No, that's Spo's expectations so far. But I think from the fans' perspective, that he's going to be 85% of the version of Victor that was an all-star a couple seasons ago. And that's probably very unrealistic. But again, I think a guy who can put the ball down, create offense for himself and others, get the occasional three-point shot or midi, and then on top of that, provide pretty solid team defense, if not great individual defense.
Okay. Like, I think that's where you kind of have to start, because I don't feel disappointed from what I've seen from Victor Oladipo. Like, he hasn't played in a year. He not only had surgery, he had corrective surgery on a prior one that didn't go well. So, like, all of that combined with trying to fit into this lineup that, one of the hallmarks of the team is, hey, we can do a lot of different things scheme-wise. That's a lot to learn on the fly. And you're coming into a situation in which Kyle Lowry's already there, and he's being reintegrated too. Gabe Vincent has stepped up. Tyler Herro's in the middle of a 6-man of the year campaign. Max Strus has done good things. Duncan Robinson is back in the rhythm after a very slow start to the season. So, like, there's just a lot that he has to sort through individually before you even get into his actual play. So, like, I'm fine with what he's done. As far as what he's done on the court, I've enjoyed the defense more than the offense so far. Like, I think he has been pretty active as a help defender. I've loved some of the weak side rim protection flashes from him already. On switches, he hasn't been burned. He certainly doesn't look like the 17-18 version of himself on the ball. Like the screen navigation isn't as tight as it once was, but like it also hasn't been bad. Like he's been fine. And if Miami's switching a bunch, he doesn't have to worry about navigating screens that often anyway. Offensively, it's cool when he has the ball in his hands. Like when they go to empty corner pick and roll with him and Bam, it's been fantastic. His other pick and roll partners, we'll see. On the downside of that, like there's been a little bit of passivity. Like some of that is just him trying to find himself, and sometimes it's just misreads. Like there's been a lot of, I'm going to drive. I have the inside edge here. I actually have an angle for the shot. Let me just dribble around and probe and see if I can find something better. And there's like sometimes a solid shot is the best you're going to get in a possession. So like just take that. But overall, like I don't have many bad things to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think any of us wanted a bad take about Victor's return. But
no, I think that was a really good point that Nekias hit on there earlier. Is it is such a weird situation that Oladipo walks into. First of all, he didn't know when he was walking into any situation, right? We had no idea, and he had no idea when he would be cleared and when he would actually get on the court. And it turns out he gets on the court with 15, 16 games left in the season. And this Heat team is so much different than the Heat team that he tried to join last year after the deadline, right? Last year's team was reeling, just sort of looking for answers, making some deals at the deadline, trying to fill some holes on a really tired and sort of limping roster, where this team has way more depth than we thought. He's competing not with like the starters for minutes. He's competing with Gabe Vincent and Max Strus for minutes now. And that's not like a diss. It's just it's kind of funny where this Heat group is. Number one seed in the Eastern Conference. Expectations are very high. They had been rolling and winning at a really high rate. And now you have Victor Oladipo trying to step into that while working his way back from 333 days of not playing basketball. It's a really tough place for him to be in, which is why I think Spo has been like, you know what, it's 15 minutes a game. We're not going to ask a ton from him. But as far as the on-court product is concerned too, like it's fine what he's done, right? He's not winning games for the Heat right now. He's not losing games for them either. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of version of Oladipo we get come playoff time. We've got another, 12 games left on the schedule for him to really work his way back into 85% all-star or whatever it is that he ends up becoming. I don't want to put those expectations on him. I don't think it's fair, but as long as he can come in and do some of the defensive things, and when Nekias was hitting on earlier, like, yeah, the physical stuff is going to come, right? He's still a step slow. There's still some things that he's trying to work through, which is totally reasonable. But the weak side, defensive rotations, all this kind of stuff, navigating pick and rolls, the mental part of the game, that doesn't go away necessarily, right? Like that's the stuff that he can actually bring to the table in a playoff scenario that maybe some of these less experienced guys can't at that same degree. And so I think that's what the Heat are hoping for.
All right, even going back to the Houston game, like we got to the second half, once you actually started seeing him get the on-ball reps and getting downhill and pick and roll and stuff, like that was fun. What was fun for me, there was a possession, I want to say late third quarter. Houston's running a pick and roll on the left side of the floor. Victor Oladipo's guarding the guy in the corner. Victor Oladipo didn't just pull in early for help. He walks all the way into the paint. I'm just like, oh, Romer Vic is back. He must really be feeling good right now. So, like, as he gets more comfortable, I think you'll start to see him more of in his element defensively and moving forward.
You don't have any concerns about the passivity that you brought up earlier? Because even in yesterday's game against the Detroit Pistons, it was a game where Tyler Herro had to take over in the second and eventually in the fourth quarter, and he's out on the floor with Oladipo. And there were moments there where it seemed like Oladipo, perhaps if again in context, if he had been at full strength, maybe would have been a lot more aggressive, but instead he was just kind of just dumping the ball to Tyler, like so many other Heat players have done this season, and letting him go to work as opposed to him trying to create shots for himself. You don't think that might be an ongoing problem for the Heat?
I'm not concerned about it yet. Like I noticed it, and in the moment, it's like, hey, I wish you would have took the shot. I wish you would have probed a little bit harder here or whatever. Right. But like zooming out, this is game 4 for him.
4, yeah.
Once we get game 8, game 9, if we're starting to see the same thing, especially if he hasn't had like a twisted ankle or something like that in between that stretch. If he stays healthy and we're still talking about this 4 or 5 games from now, then I'm like, okay, what does this look like? For me, I'm like, okay, what does Gabe Vincent look like? What does Kyle Lowry look like? Like those are the guys I'm more so looking at. Oh, you've been here. Like there shouldn't be any questions about passivity or decision making from you guys because you've been in the floor of the season. Like Kyle Lowry's obviously missed a bunch of time, but like they've been more present than Victor Oladipo has.
I'm glad you brought up Lowry because that was where I was going to go next. Because a lot of people, even in comments on our shows and things of that sort, indicating, well, oh, don't worry about him being passive during the regular season. He's going to turn it up during the playoffs. And that's kind of the exact opposite of what the narrative has been about Kyle throughout his career. So I wonder when you see what Kyle's doing in terms of the offense and his role on the team, and I know you wrote about part of what he does offensively in setting screens on a piece that you released today on basketballnews.com, which everybody should go and check out. But aside from that and the screening and everything else that he does, we know that he's the floor general type, that he controls the offense, controls the pace. Wouldn't you expect him to be a little bit more aggressive in seeking his own shot as well? I mean, is that just something that we can just say, well, Kyle will figure out because, he's a veteran. He's always been able to figure out in terms of, when he's supposed to be aggressive, when he's supposed to make plays for others. Because I don't know, that the fans seem to be getting a little restless, and maybe it's just the price tag on a player with that kind of contract and things of that sort. But the expectations for Lowry and his ability to score in bunches might not be something he does at any point in time for the rest of the season.
I got you. I would say off rip, like heading into the year, I didn't expect Kyle Lowry to be like a 17, 18, 20 point per game guy. Like I think the expectation always going to be he's going to give you 13 to 16, and then on a night that you need him, he can give you 25. Mm-hmm. I haven't loved the passivity as of late.
Yeah.
And I think it's been more frustrating for me watching him because it's that passivity combined with the defense hasn't been as tight as I thought it would be this year. Like I think a step has been lost defensively for him this year. He's not a bad defender, and I do think him being able to take the charges that he does, like that still gives him value on that end. But the on-ball stuff hasn't been great this year. And so if you're not going to get all of that defensive value from him, then you are going to need more than the dump offs that force Bam to be more aggressive. That helps. You need Bam to be more of a dog offensively, but you also need Kyle Lowry to get going with the pull-up. You also need him to knock down shots. You also need him to attack the basket because, going back to the Detroit game where Jimmy Butler misses the second half, like you needed someone to puncture the paint against a Detroit defense that isn't great, doesn't have an elite guy on the roster defensively. And there's just a lot of drive and kick, which works when the defense is in rotation, but when you're playing Detroit and they're switching everything because they know nobody is really hunting their shot outside of Tyler Herro, that becomes a problem. And so you would like for Kyle to find a little bit of a flow offensively. Again, he doesn't have to be a 20-point per game guy. He doesn't have to be a 15-shot guy. I'm fine with him taking 10 shots if he's also driving to the basket with a purpose.
Yeah.
And if the defense reacts and he reacts off of that, then cool. But he can't be passive and then also lack elsewhere.
Yeah.
Career low in field goal attempts per year this year for Kyle, like 9.8 as opposed to 13.0 and similar minutes to what he played last year with Toronto.
His shooting splits are basically the same as his last All-Star season too. I mean, they're virtually identical. It's just that he's not shooting as much, to your point, David. And I don't know, deferring to Tyler Herro makes sense to me. Tyler Herro is probably the best individual scorer on the Heat's roster, maybe Jimmy Butler, depending if Jimmy Butler is feeling it. Kyle Lowry, maybe deferring to Bam Adebayo. I don't know. Maybe they're about the same offensively if Kyle Lowry is really trying to score buckets. Right. But other than that, I don't know that Lowry should be deferring to anybody else on this Heat roster at this point. I understand you're the point guard. You're trying to get the young guys involved in all that stuff, and there's a time and place for that. But when your team really does need a bucket, at some point you got to stop passing the ball to Gabe Vincent and then just go get a bucket. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where Heat fans, I don't even think they necessarily care about the field goal attempt number, like the raw number. Right. I don't think they care about it. It's just in the moment, you're just like, why does he keep passing to Caleb Martin? That's sort of what I think the frustrating part of it is. And I think it's warranted, by the way, I do. Because in the playoffs, there's not time for that. Every possession matters. And sometimes you just want your point guard to just go ahead and get a bucket for you.
Yeah, I think the counter to that, at least from Kyle's perspective, would probably be, well, I'm trying to get everybody else going. And we've heard that kind of argument from him in the past. And maybe to some degree it works, but there are just
the first three quarters, but sometimes in the fourth quarter, enough,
Especially against the Detroit Pistons. Yeah. That's where it's an easy opportunity for him to get those kind of buckets, especially when Miami desperately needs them. They're down 11 at some point. So
overall, good addition, though. I think everybody agrees on that. What this is just nitpicking, I think, at this point.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. Well, they're not going to be able to play the Detroit Pistons in a playoff matchup, but we will talk about some potential matchups in the Eastern Conference and how the Miami Heat might fare against those in the next segment. But before we do that, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. Listen to Locked On Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watch it on the Locked On NBA YouTube channel. We're here with Nekias Duncan, and we're looking at the Miami Heat and previewing what could be a potential matchup in the playoffs for the Heat, and whether or not they might be able to take advantage of some of those teams that they might face in the Eastern Conference race to the finals. But how important, Nekias, is it for Miami to have home court advantage in the Eastern Conference, in your opinion?
I think it's going to be huge for them, especially in light of a potential Brooklyn matchup in the first round. I think you want to bank in the extra home game for very obvious reasons there. But overall, like I think the home court helps. They've been very good at home. Just want to pull up the record real quick. They're 25-9 at home. Like I think if you could bank that in, then go for it.
Yeah,
good point. We're going to look at some of the potential matchups here, and I wanted to get your take on what would be the worst matchup for the Miami Heat at any level, the best matchup for the Heat, and what would be the most potentially entertaining one, at least on paper, in your perspective. You can start off, Herro, wherever you like it.
I would say I'm actually kind of torn. I think the matchup, if I'm Miami, I wouldn't want to see Brooklyn or Toronto for very different reasons.
In that first round?
Yeah. Because Toronto highlights everything that we're concerned about with Miami in the half-court offense, right? Like you worry about who is the pure bucket getter. And so here's Toronto that just has a bunch of switchy dudes and can just junk up your stuff. Like every Heat Raptors game over the last 2 years has been an absolute slugfest.
Yeah.
So like you just don't want to do like Miami should still be favored to win that series. I do think they have a better roster. They have a better coach. Like they should win, but that's going to be an ugly 6 or 7 games if Miami didn't get together in the half court. And then for Brooklyn, Miami has a defender. Yeah, it's Kevin Durant, it's Kyrie Irving's fresh off of a 60 piece. It's just like, okay, if you're talking about half court
switch like home court, like as the number 1 seed, can you give home court advantage to Brooklyn for that series?
That might it might be something they look into. Right? But no, it's just like I guess Brooklyn would be the one.
It would be.
It's because just you don't want to get into a shot making fest with them. The Heat do have bodies to throw. They do have PJ Tucker for Kevin Durant. They have Bam Adebayo. They have Caleb Martin. Like we saw when they played a week or so ago, they junked things up with that zone, which was shout out to Cooper Moorhead for writing the piece about how distinctly different that zone was. It was kind of like a box and one mixed in with something else. So they have options. None of them are great because Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant.
Right.
But then the offense is just like, okay, what happens on a night when KD's knocking down contested shots and your best bet is Jimmy Butler bullying Bruce Brown?
The Heat have actually played the Nets pretty well in the regular season, but we all kind of recognize that regular season Brooklyn Nets is not what we're expecting from playoff Brooklyn Nets, and maybe that's our mistake. I think what we're seeing is their ceiling, right? And I think that's fair. Like, and if you had your choice between Brooklyn, Toronto, Atlanta, Charlotte, which is the play-in tournament teams right now, obviously you would pick any of those teams over Brooklyn. Like Charlotte, you're walking over them in 4 games, no doubt about it. Atlanta, Trae Young, maybe they steal a game or 2 and that goes 5 or 6 games, but Miami's not worried about those teams. Even Toronto, I'm with you. Like it'll get mucked up a little bit. It'll be a physical game, like you said. Miami could lose a guy to injury in that series, like and kind of limp into the next round. But that Brooklyn series in particular, like that's one where you're like, oh, are we going to lose to the 8th seed? And is that going to be like super embarrassing because we're the 1 seed? Even though it's the 8th seed Brooklyn Nets, it would still be embarrassing as a 1 seed. I don't know. I'm still at the point where as long as Miami could keep the 1 seed, that's what's kind of going back to the original question, David. Like this is why it's important for them to keep the 1 seed, because I don't think Brooklyn ends up the 8th seed. You give me 1 game to win the 7th seed and you're the Nets, I'm trusting Kevin Durant in that instance. I actually think the Nets end up with the 7th seed and Milwaukee or Philadelphia gets screwed in this situation. Miami ends up playing the easier team. That's what I think that is what ends up happening. I'd rather have the 1 than the 2 at this point, because that means you're betting on Kevin Durant in the play-in tournament. I'd rather bet on him as opposed to betting against him.
All right, let's move on. Is there a matchup that you think would favor Miami in terms of those kind of individual assignments, or whether or not their offense would be able to click against a particular team's defense or something like that, in your opinion?
That would boil down to Atlanta or Charlotte making a playoff team. Like I'm with Wes. Like I am just good on Charlotte. Like that defense is terrible. Like they haven't had Gordon Hayward for a large swath of it. So if he's healthy, then that makes them better. But like I just don't trust their defense at all. I think that's one Miami wins rather easily. Atlanta is also terribly defensively this year. Like not enough has been spoken about Clint Capella just not looking like himself anymore. That gets ugly because Trace is really good. But like those are the two because they have the bad defenses. I don't think you have to worry about the half court woes as much against those.
What about Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Boston? Like this next tier of team, when we start looking at potential matchups later in the playoffs, if Miami's able to advance that far, is there a nightmare scenario for you? Or maybe a dream scenario for you where there's a team that Miami can avoid if they make it to the finals?
Ooh, man. So if we're looking at the bracket, they get first round. Second round series is going to be the winner of 4 or 5. That's Chicago and Boston right now. I want no parts of Boston from Miami.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely no parts of them. You hope that one of those two teams move out of that bracket or Chicago pulls it off in the first round. I think Miami matches up very well with Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's been pretty clear, at least throughout the regular season. And who knows what we could expect from DeMar DeRozan in the playoffs. But I think the Boston matchup certainly would be a lot. They've got some pride there, obviously, from the bubble and their matchup in there. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about Bam Adebayo's block on Jason Tatum and everything else. And it should be an exciting one. That might be the answer to the next question about whether or not that would be the most entertaining matchup in an Eastern Conference playoff race for Miami. What do you think about that, Nekias?
Ooh, entertaining between Miami and Boston?
Yeah.
I would love it just because I'm a nerd and I love watching defense.
Sure.
But
would that be a better, from a defensive standpoint, would that be better than just say the narratives of the stories that would go from a third potential matchup between Miami and Milwaukee?
It would for me at least. Right. And again, like if you're viewing this through like a Heat fan prism, like yeah, it's cool that Bam got the block against Jason Tatum. Also, the Celtic team is terrifying right now. So I don't know how good I'm gonna feel about that once you actually get into the series. I think from an entertainment standpoint, like Heat Philly would probably be if you're looking at like the narrative stuff.
I mean, that could be the fine. I mean, this is going to be a really great playoffs if things break the way we expect them to, because you could end up looking at potentially here, like a Philadelphia Brooklyn second round and Miami Boston in the second round, and then maybe like Miami and Philly in the conference finals, to your point. But like, is that because it's a stylistic thing, Nekias?
Like it would be a stylistic clash. It would also be, Joel Bam. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Just a chess match with James Harden. Like that would be fun. And if the Sixers do lose that series, good Lord, the fan base is going back and forth. That's going to be an adventure to say the least. So I think that's the slander series, if anything. So from a fan experience, like that's probably the team. I think that's the team they will want to beat the most.
I actually think that like the Heat, like if you're giving me odds on the Heat beating Boston, the Heat beating Philly, or the Heat beating Milwaukee, I actually like their odds playing Philly versus those other two teams more, despite Philly maybe having the two better players, or like let me rephrase that: the better duo between the Boston duo and the Milwaukee duo. I think everybody would say, you know what, that Sixers duo is probably the superior duo. But and given how they've played recently, obviously they've been awesome. But I actually like Miami's chances against Philly more than I like their chances against even Boston or Milwaukee.
You know, I've got to just in discussing all these different teams and all the the different potential scenarios and everything else. I got to disagree with what you said earlier, Wes. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people will expect this Heat team and the outsized expectations for this group to be able to reach the Eastern Conference Finals, but I don't know that it would necessarily be an embarrassment for them to lose to this particular 8th seed if it's the Brooklyn Nets or anything like that. And considering everything else, all the other teams that they'll have to face, if it's Boston or Philadelphia, I think there's just so many challenging good teams in the Eastern Conference this year that I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised to see any team advance to the Eastern Conference Finals at this point, whether it's Miami or not. So I don't know that necessarily counts as an embarrassment, but we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. We'll talk a little bit about some of the rotation questions facing Erik Spoelstra in the next segment. You're listening to Locked On Heat. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter. Use the hashtag AskLOHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. Let's get into some of these rotation questions, Nekias, and start with the most obvious one. What happens to the upcoming Sixth Man of the Year award winner, Tyler Herro? You referenced him earlier. Do you think he's inserted into the starting lineup? Would that be the move there for Erik Spoelstra to make entering the playoffs?
I don't think so. I mean, this would just kind of be similar to the Goran Dragic thing a couple years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people are expecting.
You're stealing my prediction here, David. I think I called this like 2 months ago. I think Herro ends up in the starting lineup. Said it on the show.
Okay. All right.
Well, listen,
that's for me. I don't see because I think for Goran, like I think that was his best role, and it was a way to preserve him just because he's older. Like I don't think there's a preservation thing going on with Tyler Herro. So like if it's
not at all
cliche and all that good stuff, but like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like I don't. What does that do? Because I think even in terms of like first quarter net rating, like I think Miami's been pretty good in first quarters. It hasn't always.
It takes Duncan Robinson out of the starting lineup. That's what it does. And I don't know that. And as many people, like, I'm not like here for the Duncan slander. Like I think Duncan Robinson has been fine for them, and just the spacing that he creates on the floor is enough to keep him in that first unit. But I think that's maybe where people are coming from when they talk about this is. Yeah. Hey, if instead of putting Max Strus, who has no experience, into the starting lineup in a playoff situation, maybe you go with Tyler Herro. And that's why I was predicting it earlier in the year. It was more of a joke just because Duncan Robinson was struggling at the time. But I could see Spo doing it in a certain matchup. Like if he just thinks that, hey, we need that kind of shot creation against this specific team, I could see him doing it like that. But I don't think it would be like predetermined. Like we're starting Tyler in the playoffs because now he's got fresh legs, to Nekias' point. You know,
is it like a break class in case of emergency kind of thing? Like, if you're like something like that. If it's game 7 and you're desperate, you need to win here, you maybe potentially insert him to the starting line.
Yeah, I guess my counter to that would be like, what would be the matchup that you do that with? Because I think what you have to balance with that, once Miami does close games with Tyler Herro stuff, I guess especially against like top tier teams, like he becomes the guy that gets hunted on these switches, and Miami gives it up a ton. So like if you were saying, all right, cool, we're just gonna break this glass and start Tyler in a game 7. If you're doing that against Brooklyn and you're planning on switching against Brooklyn anyway, you're just saying, all right, KD, pick on Kevin Durant from minute 12. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm just kind of like, do you want to do that if you don't have to? And the other part of this is like, again, I think it's different between Herro and Goran because there's some preservation with Goran and not necessarily with Herro. Do you do that if you aren't comfortable or if you aren't confident in a guy like Victor Oladipo or Gabe Vincent, whichever one's kind of handling the second unit? If they haven't proven that they're able to carry second units right now, do you want to lose that ability to stagger and stuff?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think Tyler's earned that role as like kind of your super sub off the bench at this point. I think kind of zooming out on the rest of this roster too, I think Erik Spoelstra does have some major rotation questions. And I don't think it is whether or not Tyler Herro starts. I think it's who gets minutes in the playoffs. And I think, the first round rotation could look very different than this. But I don't know if they draw Brooklyn, like now you're looking at, all right, who are our top 8? Who's our top, maybe even 7? I don't know. I mean, it's a tough matchup. You're looking at more of what might be like an Eastern Conference Finals type of rotation where you're really playing your best guys heavy minutes, as opposed to a normal type of traditional first round, which is usually not that bad of an opponent. I don't like Markieff Morris is getting a bunch of run lately because he's healthy, and obviously they're trying to figure out what he is. I don't know that he's in a Sharpie in the rotation in the playoffs. What happens with Caleb Martin? Do you find minutes for Gabe Vincent? Do you find minutes for Max Strus? Nekias, we've talked about this a bunch on the show. What are your thoughts on who should be the 8 for Miami at this point?
You listed a bunch of guys, and there was one guy that was not mentioned who I have the biggest question mark about. You mentioned Markieff Morris. Like, is Dwayne Dedmon in the playoff rotation at this point?
Yeah,
that's another one.
Yes, that's a great one. Look, I mean, we talked about it in yesterday's episode because he looks uncomfortable out there. Obviously, you've seen it, and I don't know if it's a lingering injury or if it's just the fact that he hasn't played a lot of games over the last couple of seasons of his career. I don't know how much more you can count on him. And yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe Markieff is the backup center at this point. Is that where you were going with this, Nekias? Or
I wonder if that's where it's going to end up trending. And if that's the answer, I have some questions. Like, I think Caleb Martin is absolutely in. I think if you're talking about the bench, Tyler Herro is obviously in.
Yeah.
I think Caleb Martin is obviously in.
Yep.
Everyone else is kind of like matchup dependent / if you're playing well, we can pencil you in. Like if Victor Oladipo finds his footing, he's going to be penciled in, period. Yeah. And then that lessens the need for a Gabe Vincent, even though he's played well this season.
Right.
Like the front court, I just don't know. Like I do feel like just the nature of the season is kind of wearing on Dwayne Dedmon. Like, I think it would probably benefit Miami to rest him a little bit more down the stretch.
Yeah. Reaching to
if you're not planning, like if you're not planning on playing Omer Yurtseven in the playoffs anyway, which you probably shouldn't, I say use the rest of the regular season to get him some reps. Rest up Dwayne Dedmon, since you know what he provides. Like, you know what he does on both ends of the floor. You know what he means to you as a rebounder, as a screener, as a guy that they've shown some comfort playing higher up in pick and rolls, which is not something I expected. I just knew he's going to be a drop guy, but he isn't. So, like, you know what you got from Dedmon. Like, use the rest of the regular season, get Yurtseven some more reps. He's earned that. He played well when he had to fill in. Do that, rest Dedmon, and now you have the ability to go with him as a traditional backup 5, depending on what your matchup is. Or you can then downsize. You know, do your staggering so you can go PJ at the 5, Markieff at the 5 if he's playing well. I am a little bit worried about Markieff Morris as the 5 in a playoff setting.
I'm worried about Markieff Morris as the anything in a playoff setting. This is not the guy. He's not. The other thing I'm a little worried about too, Nekias, is, and we talked about this a little bit after the Pistons game, the Heat's variance in regards to 3-point shooting. When they weren't having to work in Markieff Morris and Victor Oladipo and some of these other guys, and in December they were just playing all of the Caleb Martin, Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Kyle Guy minutes and stuff, and they were shooting 43s a game and stuff. I really liked that. I liked what that did to the offense. And with Oladipo in, he's only taken 9 threes in 4 games. He's not really shooting them at a high rate. Nobody cares. They're letting him. They're going under on every single screen, and he's not taking the shot. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing because, again, small sample. But from December to January, the Heat have been the Heat attempted 37.9 3-point attempts a game. From February to now, that number is down to 33.2 3-point attempts a game. So they went from, I thought, that 40 mark, which is sort of that sweet spot. Not too much when you have guys who can get to the basket like Bam and Jimmy, but not too little, versus now 33 a game. Too little in my opinion. And now you're not banking on that variance that you get with the 3-point shooting, not just from a scoring standpoint, obviously putting points on the board, but also from just like loosening up that half court offense. I think when they start to float higher to that 40 number, then things get a little bit easier for Jimmy and for Kyle Lowry and for Bam and these guys. And I don't love what they are asking of Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro, which is basically be our only 3-point shooters, you know, at any given time. Like, all of the floor spacing is your responsibility now, versus when they did have guys like Gabe and Max in there at different points in the game, which I thought, again, loosened up the offense. I just don't know what the answer is. Who do you take out? If Oladipo don't got it by the time the playoffs roll around, you take him out. If Markieff Morris isn't giving you anything, you take him out. Caleb Martin's been very free about taking shots. He's just been hurt lately. So I think he'll help some when he comes back. But, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see more of those guys play together. I just don't know who's the odd man out. Odd man's out. Like, there's going to be multiple people that probably have to leave the rotation to get to that level of playing all those guys together for multiple minutes.
You haven't mentioned Max Strus. Is that a name? That
Strus, I meant if I didn't mention him, I meant to. Yeah.
Okay. Nekias, what do you think about Strus? No, I'm just curious. Is he the guy who finds himself potentially out of the rotation come playoff time?
I think he is the guy. Like, that was kind of the guy I pinpointed because he was already starting to lose minutes before Oladipo made his return. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I see where they're going. Like, Gabe Vincent has won that mini battle between him and Strus. That's going to be the one, because what he provides as not just a 3-point shooter, but as a guy that can get it off of movement. Yeah, like, it's so distinctly different than what Victor Oladipo provides right now that if Victor Oladipo it doesn't have to get it, like, I think that's your opportunity for Strus. And if you don't believe in Markieff Morris, then you're going to see more Caleb Martin at the 4, and that's going to open up minutes for Strus as well. So I think he's going to be the guy you keep an eye on in that regard.
I mean, that 13-point burst to basically win that Pistons game might have earned him a job. I'm not even kidding. Like,
that's for amateurs. That's for amateurs.
No, but it is that close. Like, when it comes down to Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and some of these, and like Markieff Morris and some of these guys that we're talking about, Dwayne Dedmon even, like, if you could just do that, like, that's the kind of burst that can win a playoff game, which can win a playoff series. And I don't really know that these other guys that we're talking about even have that kind of potential. And that's what I think the Heat offense is just missing right now. If you're sort of going into it with the top 8 that we thought we would see going into this regular season, which was probably Oladipo, Markieff Morris, Dwayne Dedmon, like, and Tyler Herro, that's your top 9. Your 4 off the bench. Like, there's just not that much room for something for a guy to kind of catch fire and win you a game, right? Like, and this is, again, kind of the argument we've always had with Duncan Robinson when everybody was bashing him during the slump, is he can win you a game in the playoffs just if he makes 7 threes. He can win you a game, which can obviously in turn win you a series. So I wish the Heat could find ways to get more of those guys on the court. Maybe it is Max Strus, because ask me a month ago, and I thought Max Strus would have been the odd man out because of the defensive things. But there's enough good defenders in this rotation that maybe it's okay, and you need his ignitability.
Yeah, I think offense is going to be the question with this group once you head into the playoffs.
Yeah, and how much? Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens. A few weeks away, and Miami is slowly climbing their way towards the Eastern Conference playoffs. We'll have all the coverage that you need right here. Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Now, make sure you make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Nekias, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Anytime. This is David Ramil signing off. Thanks for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.